Entertainment back in the day was a lot different. The internet wasn't nearly as accessible as it is now. You didn't have a way to Uber Eats your McDonald's nuggets to your house. You had to go there in person, or you didn't get them. At least back then you got them cheap, but now you have to use an app to get any sort of discount. If you wanted to see a movie, you usually rented it out for a weekend from Blockbuster, or went to see the actual movie at a local theater. Sometimes you might have caught it on television, but there are really no guarantees. It was a 50-50 shot that the Iron Giant got a 24-hour marathon on television. Speaking of television, I watched a lot of Cartoon Network, like an insane amount of it, including Adult Swim when I probably shouldn't have been. Unlike most kids back in the early 2000s, I had a classic CRT with cable in my room, which meant I got all the channels I wanted at the time when I was a kid, which included Nickelodeon and Disney Channel. But my all-time just go-to channel as a kid was the Cartoon Network. Ed, Edd and Eddy, Johnny Bravo, Powerpuff Girls, Courage the Cowardly Dog, Dexter's Laboratory. I just about remember every single episode of those shows growing up. Not to mention, on certain days of the week like Saturdays, you'd be in for a really special treat, because that's usually when Toonami would air all the greatest anime of all time. It was no joke, it was a stacked lineup. Like, compared to Toonami now, this was like one that could not be beaten. You had Dragon Ball Z, whatever Gundam they were airing at the time, Yu Yu Hakusho, Rurouni Kenshin, Naruto, Zatch Bell, Yu-Gi-Oh!, and Woolen Warriors? Okay, yeah, nobody remembers that last one, but at least they tried something new, I guess? These were all the big time series that introduced me to anime, and it wasn't the only block to exist around this time that included heavy hitters. Adult Swim, aside from airing things like Family Guy or Futurama for a time, would also air anime on a weekly basis. This included things like Trigun, Cowboy Bebop, Inuyasha, Big O. I remember it all pretty vividly back in the year 2003, like it was yesterday. They eventually had to scale it back a bit, but this meant Saturday was always stacked. Things like Bleach would get added to the mix, Fullmetal Alchemist, Scaride. Man, those were the days. You really can't recapture what we had back then, because as that was all going on, slowly but surely the internet was catching up. In the background of all this television greatness, YouTube started cropping up in 2005 around the same time, which would allow people from everywhere to soon be able to upload videos of themselves. I remember waiting in a doctor's office flipping through a magazine to be stunned by this page from it. Just what the heck was a YouTube? Either way, I quickly forgot about it because my ADHD got the better of me. A few years later, while googling up Naruto stuff to just look at, I guess, I stumbled across a video showing the pivotal scene where Itachi and Sasuke finally meet after all these years in a thumbnail. Clicking on it would soon change the directory of my life, though I couldn't really tell you what the video was about. But when I think of what Naruto had a lot of at the time, it was AMVs that came to mind. There were a lot of them, with Linkin Park to Breaking Benjamin, sometimes the occasional drowning pooled bodies, maybe a little bit of Evanescence. It was a special genre of YouTube videos that were creative at that time. Nowadays, anyone can make a silly little clip show to music with cheesy transitions if they felt like it. I even did one myself for fun last year. This was pretty much the point of no return when it came to television, because although something like YouTube was essentially harmless in the grand scheme of things, it was a monumental moment for the internet that meant that there were actually potential in the idea when it came to watching videos across the world. Netflix, known for mostly shipping out DVDs to mailboxes at the time, would soon take it digital with their very first streaming service, allowing anyone with a good enough internet connection to watch movies from the comfort of their own home. And it didn't just stop at movies, eventually television shows even popped up. That's when the whole thing exploded in popularity from there. Blockbuster pretty much got wiped out in due time, and really any retailer whose business was nothing but movies ended up going under, and so it was only a matter of time before slowly everyone wanted a piece of that pie. But for a while there, television was still a viable way to watch anything, regardless of the growth of Netflix. If you paid extra, you could even watch movies from HBO, which we'll circle back to later. A bunch of these premium cable channels gave you variety, and sometimes you even had anime if you're lucky enough to be up at 4 in the morning like I was. It was still king, and was going to be king for a while, until it wasn't. I think around about, let's say 2016, 2017 is when streaming services really took off, because as the rest of the world got better infrastructure that allowed for more and more countries to have internet access, it became clear that lending out movies or television shows to Netflix wasn't nearly as profitable anymore. So you had companies like Disney and Warner Brothers that wanted to make money from their own IPs, so slowly but surely, streaming services of their own would appear, that being Disney Plus and HBO Max, respectively. Now, granted, a lot of these services already existed for years in some form or fashion around the time Netflix reigned supreme, but what's important to remember is that these particular streaming services relied on internet itself to deliver content instead of your traditional cable or satellite. This current era of streaming services, as we know them, are over the top, which wasn't really possible until Netflix took the world by storm with it. So it made sense to move on in that direction, which meant not only were things getting old content put onto them, but eventually new shows that would hook people into subscribing to that service as well. Of course, not every exclusive was worth watching, but the big hitters were all there to entice you. HBO Max has House of the Dragon, Amazon Prime Video has The Boys, Netflix, Stranger Things, Disney Plus, The Mandalorian. These could only be found on their respective platforms. Unfortunately, this also meant you had a divide in who had rights to stream this or that when it came to old favorites a lot of the time. You couldn't just watch The Goonies without a Hulu membership, for example. And don't expect any Star Wars movie to be on HBO Max anytime soon. Unless Disney wants to add another company to their Infinity Gauntlet anyways. But what made it so groundbreaking compared to television was that you had a choice. And you didn't need to surf the channel guide hoping to find something worthwhile to watch. If you wanted to marathon The Office, you could do it. If you wanted to watch every franchise movie in order, no problem. You were the king of the remote now. This was an awesome power to have at one's disposal, all thanks to the rise of the internet. But this also meant television was no longer necessary. Now these companies no longer really focus on creating new content for the existing channels, and sometimes they just throw a once exclusive streaming service show onto it if they feel like it. That's just how awful television is now. It's mostly marathons of a single show or leftover scraps, all because of how many of these streaming services exist now. With more and more people cutting the cord or trashing their satellite dishes each year, it probably won't be much longer until these services are all that we've got left. And that's exactly what these companies are betting on, because it means they won't have to share the money with anyone else if it means ditching cable sooner rather than later. While I don't really know if or when the cable will see its way out, it definitely isn't looking good. Despite solving one gripe that people had with it though, nowadays we're in a bit of a bind when it comes to them now raising prices, even adding tiers to subscriptions that, for better or worse, slowly brought back the worst things in television. Advertisements. So don't get me wrong, I love a good advertisement. I remember a lot of them, including all those Shirley Temple commercials that would play advertising a DVD box set I was never gonna own or buy because I was a literal infant. Animal crackers in my soup, monkeys and rabbits loop-de-loop. Or those commercials that were advertising an album collection of love songs that I will refrain from playing for the sake of not getting this video claimed. There's a lot of just iconic commercials like that, but unfortunately, nowadays, even commercials aren't nearly as clever or catchy as they used to be. So a lot of the time, you just want them to be over with. And they try, but sometimes you get one that feels like it's taking way too long for its own good. And it's like, just get to the point already. Come on. Please, just come on. Please. Oh my God. So what's the solution to those ads? Well, you either deal with them at the cheapest tiered price, or you pay about an extra $7 to $8 more to never see them again. Yeah, so let's take something like HBO Max for example, or Max, just Max as they want us to call it now, for Ad Lite, which is like their bottom bitch tier, either way you slice it. You're paying about $9.99 as of 2025. The ad-free version would cost you about $16.99, which is where we border along expensive territory with all this. And other than you no longer having any ads whatsoever, now you're just able to download 30 different things for offline viewing pleasure. And last but not least, we've got the expensive tier on this list, Ultimate, at a grand whopping total of $20.99. This was truly Max's ultimate offering for those who felt confident enough in what they had to offer. The superfan who enjoyed everything DC, everything Cartoon Network, this was the must-have if you like the old and the new that would soon come to be. I mean, what was there not to like? This was a dream come true for the inner kid in me, to enjoy and be able to watch all the old cartoons I used to watch under this one streaming service. It was a dream come true, right? I mean, what could possibly go wrong?
Oh my God, bro.
Oh, hell no, man. What the fuck?
Yeah, so unfortunately, as good of an idea as this all sounded on paper, you have to remember that these companies are running a business, and what this tends to entail also means being prone to making really fucking stupid decisions that nobody asked for. The biggest offender in all this being Max, ran by Warner Brothers Discovery. When Warner Brothers and Discovery Inc. had this huge merger a couple years back, it had led to major changes that affected every single piece of content that they had to offer. Movies were getting shelved, shows were getting canceled, and the biggest takeaway of all was Max was having a majority of their cartoon catalog just completely obliterated. They did this in an attempt to save themselves money, supposedly, from what was explained, which didn't make a whole lot of sense because many of these projects in the pipeline were either already complete or nearing completion. So to suddenly pull the rug underneath them all was a huge eye-opener for a lot of folks. How were you going to save any money by completely canning things that might have offset whatever costs were sunk into the projects in the first place? The math and logic behind all of it wasn't really making any sense to me. This would also include wiping the slate clean with a lot of their existing cartoons that were not just a part of the legacy of Cartoon Network, but were fundamental parts of my childhood. And I'd like to say it was just the old shows, but it wasn't. They're also doing this with even somewhat newer shows, with Teen Titans Go being taken away as of recently. So what exactly does any of this accomplish for a multi-billion-dollar company? Are you telling me that paying any of these creators royalties is a costly expense? That's bullshit and they knew it. They very clearly wanted nothing to do with whatever legacy existed here. They only cared about what was in the bank and how much they were bleeding as a whole, and what needed to be cut in order to maximize as much profits as they could. What, you thought they wanted to shore the name to keep it simple? Yeah, right. Whether or not this bold strategy of theirs really saved the money is up in the air. I know they've claimed to save quite a bit from removing shows from Max, including Sesame Street. Let that sink in for a moment, but I don't think it's working as well as they think it is. Because when you piss off the majority of people who had subscribed to Max for all this old content, only to immediately have it yanked away without much of an explanation, well, then it shouldn't be any surprise at all when droves of people begin canceling their subscription all of a sudden. What sort of message does it send to do all this? That people should pirate all the content you've taken away from them, now that the official way to watch it is no longer available? Because that's what seems to be happening here ever since WBD went on this cost-cutting, tax write-off spree, far as I can tell. Then you have the nerve to raise the prices when you don't get the desired results? Forget it! Why bother anymore, right? You may as well sail the 7 seas if that's how they're gonna act about all this. I'm sorry for the tone change. I just don't understand how a company can operate and think that it's okay to trick its customers. People expect this content, and when you don't give them the content that they're paying for, then why should they bother? I know I don't want to bother, but let's get to the rest of this. Because I wish I could say it was just Max pulling all this nonsense these days, but they aren't the only streaming service doing this, I'm afraid to say. It's not unusual for movies or TV shows to expire when it comes to streaming rights, because it usually means a fresh rotation of content as a result. But it also means you really only have a finite amount of time to actually watch what you want. You don't own any of it. That makes sense. But what I don't understand is when it comes to content they clearly own and that they've had ownership of for several decades now, they feel the need to take those away instead of leaving them alone? So you mean to tell me you can't keep your legacy content that you own on your service? Are you really running low on gigabytes that you had to remove the only legal way to actually watch those shows? Make it make sense somehow. I can't even begin to imagine it's a sound business strategy. The precedent that Max has set has really not been a good standard for the streaming industry as a whole, honestly. It just made things a lot more confusing for the average consumer who just wants to relive their childhood. And we pay way too much to get treated like idiots. And that's another thing that just irks me with this whole situation. The pricing of these fucking tiers. Now, it's like I said earlier, Max is not an outlier to everything currently wrong with streaming services. I mean, they all tend to at least have similar business practices in one way or another. In fact, just recently, Netflix decided to do the whole pay for there to be no ads thing, but including advertisements in their most basic plan at about $6.99, which starts off reasonable, but say you don't want to do that, right? Now, if you want to be without any of those ads, plus a couple other bonus features, you're going to need to pay a whopping $15.49 a month these days. And if you wanted the things to look clean or crisper on OLED display like I do, you better cough up $22.99 now or else. That's more expensive than what Max or Disney Plus want you to pay, interestingly enough. Yeah, that's pretty awful. And the prices don't usually stay the same for long because there's been a trend of them going up $1 or $2 these days with rising costs of things within the United States, as well greed in general. And remember, there's only a handful of actually decent exclusives on these services. Oftentimes, it isn't really worth sticking around, so people tend to hop around month to month, which I can't imagine is really all that convenient either, but that's just the world we live in, it seems. Despite all these companies wanting to put out their own separate streaming service, they also seem to buy each other out on a dime whenever possible, which presents another problem I haven't really talked about yet with all this. You see, when Disney decided to buy out 21st Century Fox years ago, they didn't just get it for the film rights to X-Men and the Fantastic Four for the MCU, but to expand their entertainment empire as a whole. They now own things like The Simpsons, Home Alone, Alien, and more unbelievably, Family Guy, who's made them the butt of many jokes prior to being in their possession. This was the monopoly of all monopolies, and still has repercussions to this day. Deadpool and Wolverine be damned. This also meant that they got to have the 30% stake in Hulu that Fox had in all this, and that led to the rest of the dominoes falling in place. Soon, the rest of the companies who had stakes in Hulu sold off to Disney, and before you knew it, they had full control of Hulu, alongside ESPN Plus, and obviously Disney Plus itself. It's a huge problem for the consumer because there's always a bigger fish waiting to gobble the next company up nowadays, and you always hear rumors of potential mergers, more than ever, just because they want to make as much money as possible, almost as if they're competing to be the only service that people pay for, which is concerning because it sort of sounds like they're going in reverse, doesn't it? Okay, so hear me out. Back in the day when I was just in britches, cable was expensive. Always was expensive, actually. If you wanted certain channels in the higher digits, you had to pay more, not unlike with all these tiers that we deal with today. Still with me? Okay, so with all that said, at the end of the day, you generally have to pay $100 or sometimes hundreds a month to get channels you may or may not have wanted, mainly because they all came bundled together a lot of the time. Whereas with satellite, you had a larger range of channels that weren't just restricted to the United States, and it was a more affordable option until it really wasn't. Once a bunch of these streaming services came along, with content readily available at a low price, eventually cable and satellite users were dropping like flies, and with the ability to pick and choose what you wanted to watch, it was a much better option overall. But now that the honeymoon phase is over, these companies are slowly but surely coming together, having talks about buying or being bought out, which would mean not only being under one roof, but now having to raise prices to reflect the cost of these services because of said merging coming to fruition. Thus, bringing us right back around to what people hated about cable or satellite in the first place, being way too damn expensive. And yes, while it's still affordable all things considered compared to back then or even now, you have to remember that with all of them being spread out, it's a lot harder to be able to have multiple streaming services all at one time. And if they weren't coming together to form a megazord of a streaming service, they tend to bundle together so that you can save money, which in reality means a whole lot of nothing in the grand scheme of things. Because when you combine all the main ones together without ads at the best possible quality, you'd be paying nearly the same price of cable essentially. What the fuck? And don't even get me started on all of them coming down hard on the account sharing. It's like I said earlier, monkey see, monkey do. So when Netflix did it first, so did Disney Plus, along with its sister services and so forth. And yeah, I hate it. Greedy as fuck if we're being honest. And if you wanted to share with anyone that doesn't live in your household, they tack on an extra charge as the ultimate middle finger to that. Yeah, want to share? Give us an extra $5 then, little man. Like, do you want people to pirate things? Because this is how you create a pirate, just saying. And you might say at that point, just buy everything physically. Easy peasy. That is an option, but with retailers like Walmart or Best Buy phasing out a lot of that now, due to said streaming services by the way, I imagine it's going to be a headache in the near future to conveniently get a hold of a lot of these movies, especially as many old DVDs are obviously out of print, and with disc rot being prevalent with many of these older releases, unfortunately, it isn't always a sound option. Now, Blu-ray has gone a lot better at preserving itself, but once again, with these retailers deciding to no longer sell physical media in a world where you can just see it on any old streaming service, it's going to be a lot harder to simply purchase the latest film as we march into an inevitable all-digital age. So what ends up being the next best option besides actually owning it physically? Well, piracy. It's such a dirty word, and a lot of these companies don't want you to say it aloud nor hear about it. But remember how I said earlier that the internet eventually expanded much wider and improved as the years went on? Not only are streaming services becoming more viable these days, piracy is also reaching this apex where you don't really even need to torrent anything to watch whatever you want. You can just as easily go onto a website that just has what you're looking for. It's really become such a simple thing for us to do in a time where we can do whatever and anything we want to do within reason. It doesn't really matter how many times they try to cut the heads off the Hydra, it's just going to keep sprouting up more heads in their place, and that's just how it is now. But maybe it didn't have to be like that. Things could have been different, at least I think so. Look, when you take away the things that people hold dear, that people remembered so fondly, it's like stepping on their inner child, or at least that's how it feels for me. And it doesn't just apply to silly old cartoons from the early 2000s I grew up on. Now the current generation who's making memories of these current cartoons are also being affected just the same. Because while I might not give a single shit about the bastardized version of Teen Titans Go, seeing it getting taken away like that despite it being a show that's still airing on Cartoon Network today, this current year, that just puts into perspective how hard of a fall from grace things have had in the entertainment industry. That nothing is ever going to be safe from this need for tax write-offs and for CEOs to pay themselves more than what they're worth. And really, I wish I could say the same for all that anime that I've watched over the years just the same. But even that genre of animation is suffering a similar fate, with Crunchyroll becoming the be-all place to stream anime. A lot of it actually not even being on there sometimes, thus making piracy a necessary thing in order to see the things that I want to watch, to relive a time where things were simpler as a kid, where I didn't have to think about the current conflicts going on in our country, about all the wars that are taking place, or are soon to take place, about having to pay all these bills that are slowly becoming more expensive than they were a year ago, just about all those adult things in general that are just mentally draining. That's all I've ever wanted from any of this. Was to forget, even if it was for a fleeting moment, that the world around me just flat out sucks, and I'm just living it in the best I can, coping with whatever struggles I'm currently entangled with. Is it really that too much to ask for? Is it that much of an unreasonable request that has to fall on deaf ears? I know it might not mean much to your average business person who doesn't really care about any of the things that the average person has to deal with, but if we were just thrown a bone at least once here, then maybe, just maybe, life wouldn't be as hard as it is now for the majority of us. But instead, what I once knew is now a memory, a reminder of what once was, and what it is to come as we reach the halfway point of this decade. I can't say for sure what the next 5 years are going to be like. I really don't want to think that far ahead for obvious reasons, but if I had one simple request that I could have heard by any of these CEOs, it's to preserve the things that people love, new or old, because we want to look back. We want to feel the way we did before. We just need an escape. And if you take the means away of escape, whether it be a show or a movie, well, don't be surprised by the backlash. Don't be surprised you're losing money. People aren't your piggy banks. We have feelings. We have needs. We have wants. And if they aren't met, then the relationship between you and the potential customer you're chasing after is over. That's trust you'll never get back, because we aren't dumb. And we're not disposable walking money bags either. We aren't going to stand for that treatment. Until you treat people like people, you aren't getting a penny. Not from me, not from anyone. Learn your lessons from all this. Don't keep repeating the same mistakes, because I'm not the only person you should listen to. Listen to everyone else too, because without any of us, you all are nothing. Hey guys, thank you for watching my video. I'm sorry it took as long as it did. I started recording audio near the beginning of this year, and from there it was off and on again editing. I had things going on in my life that just prevented that from being a thing, but I'm trying to find a nice balance between life and putting all this blood and sweat and tears towards videos like these. I hope to produce long videos like this again in the near future, but for now, I'll probably take a step back and do slightly shorter videos, fun little videos. I want to experiment with shorts to find a way to even label videos for organizational purposes, because I know I have videos where, they're going to be longer or they're just going to be casual. So I might come up with a thumbnail system just to designate which one is which, go from there. I had a lot of fun with this. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I was very passionate about the topic, and I remember a lot of Cartoon Network and Toonami and Adult Swim. I just had a lot of nostalgia for this topic, and I felt it was more than enough to me to actually discuss. But anyways, if you like this kind of content and you want to see more, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. I will see you in the next video. Okay, guys, take care.